We tend to overemphasize money as a tool and de-emphasize the other tools we have available to us. So you have money and it is a very powerful tool, and you can use money to basically free up your time to pursue purpose. So that feels privileged. But we also have all these other tools and we forget to talk about them. So we have our families, we have our passions, we have our youth, we have our energy, we have our communities, we have our skills. Those are also tools. And if you want to build a life of purpose, you can start utilizing those now.
This show is dedicated to helping you strengthen your family tree and live financially free. Welcome to the Marriage, Kids, and Money podcast, everybody. This is Andy Hill, and today we're talking about finding purpose in life. To help us explore this topic in more depth, I've invited author Jordan Grumet back to the show today. Jordan is the host of the Earn and Invest podcast. Formerly an internal medicine physician, Jordan left his clinical practice to pursue his passion for deep conversations about purpose, money, and life. His latest book, The Purpose Code: How to Unlock Meaning, Maximize Happiness, and Leave a Lasting Legacy, is available now. Welcome back to the show, Jordan.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely, man. Well, you and I have some great deep conversations in person as well, so let's do it online today. You've had some deep conversations about purpose with a lot of people on your show and in person. Why can that be a difficult topic for people?
Well, I would have never thought, but actually purpose causes people tons of anxiety. So when I wrote my first book, Taking Stock, a big idea, a big premise of that book was that we should put purpose, identity, and connections first before we build our financial framework. So I'm out there marketing this book. I'm giving talks, and I would go to conferences, and after my talks, people would come up to me and they'd literally be angry and sweating. And they'd be like, stop asking me to find my purpose. I can't do that. I've been trying forever. It eludes me and it's making me anxious. The first time that happened, I said, it's a one-off, no big deal. But it happened conference after conference. You know, it made me do a huge dive down the rabbit hole. Like, why is purpose causing people anxiety? And yet I know I've heard that everyone also says it's one of the most important things in our life. I looked at the literature, and indeed, there are tons of studies that show that purpose is associated with health, longevity, and happiness. They're really great studies, and there are tons of them. But there are also other studies that show that up to 91% of people get anxiety when thinking about purpose, at least at some point in their life, and it causes them to be depressed and anxious. And so this was a paradox. It's what led me to write this book, and really led me to think about how purpose fits in our lives, because a lot of people are struggling with exactly what you said. How do we find our purpose? Find is a loaded word, but helping people connect with that became part of the journey of this book.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, purpose anxiety. That can definitely have some feelings for a lot of people out there, and it sounds like a lot of people you've connected with in person. Have you struggled with this personally, Jordan?
Oh my God, yes, I have, and I didn't even know what it was. So when I discovered financial independence, I was a practicing physician. I was burnt out in medicine. I was looking for a way out. And then fortuitously, I learned about the financial independence movement. I calculated my numbers, and I'm like, boom, I'm there. I actually have enough money to leave work. And I was so excited and exhilarated for like a moment. And then I had a panic attack, and it led actually to a period of significant depression where I realized that I had only really identified, and my only real sense of purpose had been becoming a doctor for so long. And I was about to step away from that. And I had no idea who I was or what felt purposeful to me. And so, yes, I've been right in the midst of it. I've gone through the same process. And so I know how bad it can feel.
What did you do to overcome that? I mean, that's a pivotal moment. Obviously, we're told by society, hey, build your wealth and everything will be just fine. It sounds like that wasn't the case for you. So what did you do to overcome that?
Well, I did a lot of the things that I actually talk about in the book. I just didn't know what I was doing at the time. So the first thing is I realized that I couldn't throw away my whole sense of purpose and identity in one fell swoop. So I couldn't just leave medicine and be like, I'm done, that's it. So I didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. What I did is I looked at my life, and the easiest thing to do since I had the money is I started subtracting out the things that weren't working. So I realized I didn't like working nights. I didn't like working weekends. I didn't like owning my own practice. And so I started just slashing those things. And this took time. This wasn't something that happened overnight. This was something that took years. But I got rid of everything I didn't like. And I realized there was one part of medicine that I loved, and that was doing hospice medicine, taking care of the terminally ill and dying. And I realized I would do that even if I wasn't being paid for it. And so this was the first inkling of purpose to me. It was like, okay, being a doctor doesn't feel purposeful, but there's this one piece of being a doctor that I really love. So I held on to that piece. But by doing that, I freed up tons of time because I was practicing as a hospice physician, maybe 10 or 15 hours a week. I got rid of nights. I got rid of weekends. I got rid of being on call. I got rid of everything else. So that created a lot of space in my life to start thinking about, well, what else feels purposeful to me? And I realized there were these things that I always loved, that I always felt connected to, that I never gave myself the permission to do. So I always loved writing. And so as a kid, I wrote poetry. Eventually, as a doctor, I wrote a blog about being a doctor, but I told myself that was a hobby. So I would do it during lunchtime or late at night when the kids were asleep, but I never really gave it the time it deserved. Same with public speaking. Eventually, when I discovered podcasting, all of these things were real joys for me. And now that I had the time to pursue them, I could unabashedly throw myself into them. And it didn't matter if I succeeded, right? I could have the most famous blog or podcast or be the most famous public speaker. But if I wasn't, and I just enjoyed the process of doing it, that was good enough. And so that was the process that I started down, the road that I started down to start regaining my sense of purpose and rebuilding my sense of identity. What I realized while writing this book is a lot of people don't have that roadmap. Like, I was lucky. I had some inklings. I had some beckonings of things that were important to me. A lot of people have those inklings and beckonings, but they don't know how to deal with them. They don't know how to give themselves permission to start pursuing them. And so I feel almost lucky in a sense that I stumbled into doing the right thing.
Yeah, I really like that. Now, you talked about your moment of realizing you've achieved financial independence or FIRE, or a lot of the conversations that people have out there. Did you take that momentary pause to absolutely do nothing? Like, some of you talk about the FIRE movement. Hey, I can retire early. I can cease to work. I can cease to do anything. Did you take that moment and then realize it wasn't for you?
No, the idea of doing nothing was petrifying to me. I mean, I have constantly been in motion my whole life. My father died when I was 7. He was a physician, and that was a big part of me deciding that identity and purpose should be being a physician too. And that motion really was almost curative, right? It helped me with the stress of childhood. It helped me with my father's death. I had a learning disability. I had all sorts of things going on. And so to go from continuous motion and momentum towards this big, audacious thing, becoming a doctor and practicing, to all of a sudden hit the brakes and have nothing would have been devastating to me. I don't know if I could have managed that. And I think a lot of us are there, right? We're used to these big careers, these big jobs, these big things that we do that don't necessarily serve us anymore. Maybe they were a sense of identity and purpose in the past, but they aren't anymore. And so for us, those over and high achievers, it's really hard to just stop and do nothing. Some people can. And I always tell people about half the population needs to quit and rest for 6 months and figure it out. And the other half needs to plan it intensely before they even get there. I was definitely someone who needed that early planning.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you talk about in your book an interesting point. You talk about little p purpose versus big P purpose. And maybe this is a part of that financial anxiety picture. Can you explain that a little bit to us?
Sure. So what I was confronted with when I realized there's this paradox, right? Purpose is great for us, health, happiness, longevity, but it also gives us anxiety and depression. How can there be a paradox? I realized that there's probably more than one type of purpose, and specifically two, and one of those is more associated with the anxiety and disappointment. And the other is probably more associated with the health and happiness. And so I defined them big P purpose and little p purpose. So let's talk about what those are. Big P purpose is a big, audacious purpose, and it's usually goal-oriented. Think about, I want to be president. I want to be a billionaire. I want to cure cancer. I want to travel to Mars. These are really big goals that society tells us we should go for it, right? If you dream it, you can do it type thing. The problem with big, audacious purpose is it's goal-oriented, and often these goals are very, very difficult to achieve. So you got to be the right person at the right time, saying the right things, have the right genetics, and then a bunch of luck. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of us don't have all those stars aligned. We don't have agency. And so if we have big, audacious purpose is really what we're searching for, a lot of times we're going to be disappointed when we don't hit the mark. So it's really, really easy to fail. It's very much all or nothing, and it's a winner take all situation. And so I think big, audacious purpose feels very scarce, like only a few people win and everyone else loses. And if you don't figure out what that purpose is supposed to be, then all is lost. Let's compare that to what I call little p purpose. Instead of being goal oriented, it's very process oriented. So as long as you enjoy what you're doing, it doesn't matter whether you reach the goal or not. As opposed to being scarce, this is really abundant. Think about all the things we could possibly enjoy doing. And so it's not all or nothing. It's all or all. Basically, all you have to do is try to do the thing. And if you enjoy doing it, great, you succeed. And if you don't, then you move on to the next thing. And so when we break out purpose into these two forms, we realize that one version tends to be very nurturing, little p purpose. Big P purpose is very common in the overachievers, the high achievers. You've got to be a high achiever, for instance, to reach financial independence. So it's not surprising that a lot of people get there, they hit that big goal, they're excited for a moment, but then they're left with, well, what's next? And so it's really easy to double down and just make that, net worth goal double. Or it's really easy to get anxious because all of a sudden you feel like the stock market's going to go down, you're going to lose that wealth. We become very achievement oriented, but the problem with that is that ultimately isn't very peaceful. Ultimately, if you're using achievements to prove that you're good enough or happy enough or that life is working, you're going to find that even when you reach that achievement, we all know about the hedonic treadmill. It works the same with achievements. We hedonically adapt down and we find ourselves searching for the next thing. Whereas little p purpose, I compare it more to a flow state. Like when you're doing something and you're just in it and excited and not even worried about the outcome, we probably want to spend more of our life in those type of states. And so I think little p purpose gets you there.
So it feels like little p purpose, as you're defining it, at least as I'm hearing, is more about healthy habits and rituals as opposed to BHAGs, the big yes. Audacious goal.
It's
right?
all about process. So process over goal, right? You want to spend your time doing things you enjoy the process of doing regardless of the goal. And so I often talk to people about podcasting because I love podcasting. Podcasting is part of my purpose, right? So let's look at two different versions of podcasting. I could podcast because I want to get 1 million downloads a month. And you and I both know it's really hard to get 1 million downloads a month, right? But that
absolutely, I've been trying for a while.
That could be my big audacious goal. But if my whole sense of purpose was married to that goal, right now, I would feel pretty bad because I'm nowhere near that. The truth of the matter is I don't have a lot of the agency to get there. Like, I don't even have the interest in working that hard. I don't plan on, paying 6 figures to hire people to help me. I just might not even be that talented at it. On the other hand, if I love podcasting and it's my little p purpose, every time I get in front of the mic and I get to interview someone, that's like an hour that's enriching. I lose track of what I'm doing. I am so in it. I'm not even worried about how many downloads I'm going to get. I'm not worried about all that. So it's all about the process. Yes, I can still have download goals, but whether I reach those or not, it's not really nearly as important. And so even if I went with the big audacious purpose version, I would get to the point where I was feeling frustrated and unhappy, and I started loathing podcasting because I wasn't reaching my goals. And if I got happy and lucky enough to reach that goal, that happiness would last for a very short period of time. And then I'd be grinding it out again, either not to lose those downloads or to build more. But the point is I'd be spending most of my time doing things that I didn't particularly like in service of these short periods of time of reaching a goal. And so that's how I look at it. That's why I think the BHAGs aren't necessarily 100% healthy. I don't think we should be goal phobic. So I always tell people, be a goal agnostic, not goal phobic. If I happen to hit 1 million downloads a month, hey, that's fantastic. So I'm not afraid of that as a goal. I just don't want my sense of happiness and purpose to rely on that goal.
Do you think it's harder to want to pursue what we're talking about, little p purpose or daily rituals, because it is difficult to quantify? We're talking about feeling, we're talking about happiness, we're talking about things like that. Whereas if I say, hey, net worth number or download number or whatever, that's easier to quantify. Do you think we're drawn to that as people because it's easy to calculate?
So here's what it is. And I don't think it's that. I think it's something a little bit more complicated. To really explain it, let me first give you a framework. I think happiness is made up of two things. I think it's meaning and purpose. And a lot of people don't know the difference between meaning and purpose. So meaning is a cognitive thing. It's the way we think about our past. It's all in our minds. It's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And happy people tend to tell them heroic stories about their past. Yes, I went through some really bad, hard things, but I came out on the other side and I'm a better person today. That's the happy person. Unhappy person derive a different sense of meaning. They tend to tell themselves victim stories about themselves. All this bad stuff happened to me. I wasn't able to overcome it. Why do bad things always happen to me? So they tend to look at the present and future in more of a negative manner. So that's meaning. It's all about the past and thinking. Purpose is all about the present and future, and it's not about thoughts. It's about actions. It's what we do today, those things we do that fill us up. So meaning is the past, purpose is the present, future. Meaning is thoughts, purpose is actions, and both of them together make us happy. Here's the thing. A lot of times I thought, especially when I wrote this book, that purpose was going to be the main issue. But as I've done more coaching and talked to more people, I realize it's actually more of a meaning issue. Most people don't tell themselves the best stories about themselves. And so instead of feeling a hero, they feel a victim, or more specifically, they don't feel enough. So they look at the stories of their past and they see that they didn't have agency or didn't feel they have agency. And so they're really stuck on enoughness. A big portion of getting past or through meaning is recognizing that you are enough. And so why do we like these achievements and these big quantifiable goals as opposed to the more ephemeral, I just want to do things I like? Because we're trying to purpose our way to enough and it just doesn't work. If you're not feeling enough inside, you can keep on trying to achieve and achieve and achieve, and it's not going to make you feel enough. The only way to really deal with that is you have to go back to meaning and tell yourself a better story. Elon Musk is the perfect example of this. Elon Musk is the richest guy in the world. He's done some of the most incredible things with electric cars and rockets. I mean, this guy has achieved more than anyone else, and he looks miserable. Why does he look miserable? I think Elon Musk suffers from an issue of meaning. And you go back, he had, a father, I think, that emotionally abused him, if not physically. I think he was made fun of a lot of at school. So he needs to go back and address his sense of meaning and feel a better sense of his past. But instead, he tries to purpose himself to enough. And that's why it's never enough money for Elon Musk. It's never enough achievements because he's trying to make himself feel enough and it isn't working. You can't do that through purpose. That's meaning. And so that's why I think the quantifiable numbers, why we think, oh, if I just have $1 million, it's going to be great. If I just get this job promotion or become partner, it's going to be great. Unfortunately, that's not how it works.
Yeah, well, this has got me thinking about my kids because sometimes I feel like Elon Musk acts like my 10-year-old at times with some of his decisions. But my son says, Dad, I want to be an NFL player. I want to be an NFL player. I'm going to play in the NFL. He's 70 pounds. He's 10 years old. He could be the next great NFL player. Now, what he's saying to me is a big P purpose, right? Or a big P goal. And I guess my question to you is, how do you have conversations with your children about these big topics? This is a big a thought-provoking topic. Is this something you just kind of address as their prefrontal cortex is already developed and say, okay, we'll talk about it after 25, buddy. You're going to be an NFL player. That's great. Or is promoting those big P, hey, you'll only be successful until you go to Mars, toxic for us as parents? I'd love to hear from your opinion on that one.
So here are a few opinions. One is, I don't think we ever should tell our parents should ever tell our kids they can't do something, right? So specifically, if they say they want to go in the NFL and be a football player, I think that's great. But what I would do if that was my child is I would really try to separate the big P purpose of becoming an NFL player to try to figure out what the real purpose anchor is. So I tell people all the time, you can't find purpose. You actually have to create or build purpose. So it's a very active process. Remember, we talked about purpose. It's all about actions. So you have to build a sense of purpose, but it is true we have these inklings or anchors that help us decide what to build this purpose around. And so my question for your child who wants to go to the NFL is, what is the anchor? Like, what does he love about football? Is it the camaraderie? Is it the teamwork? Is it that he likes working with his hands? Is it the working out? If you can find what it is that's an anchor of purpose for him, what really excites him, then first and foremost, you can say, well, you don't have to wait to be an NFL football player to become that person. You can build those things in your life now. Is it teamwork? Well, you can become a captain of the football team, regardless if you're good at playing. Is it you love talking about sports, or would you like to be an announcer? Well, you can start announcing in high school or middle school. There are all sorts of great things you can do to become that thing now, instead of, for one thing, waiting until you're old enough to be an NFL football player. But the truth of the matter is, like I said, you might not have agency of whether you're going to become a football player. You might not have the genetics, the luck. Maybe you go to a high school that doesn't have the best coach and you don't get taught well. Those are things out of your hands. But if you love football, there are a million ways to do things you enjoy the process of doing around football that could eventually become a career, that could eventually become a really fulfilling version of you. And here's what really the secret is. And I'm gonna blow the whole book for you right now. Purpose isn't even as important as interpersonal relationships. So there have been huge studies about what truly makes people happy. The Harvard Adult Developmental Study studied people for like 80 years, interviewed them every 2 years, eventually did MRIs, EEGs, blood tests. And after all these years of studying people, they found that it wasn't money, wasn't achievements, wasn't goals, wasn't any of that made people happy. It was interpersonal relationships. Here's the thing. The reason why we can do studies on purpose and show that it's related to health, happiness, and longevity, I believe, is it's a great conduit to forming communities and having interpersonal relationships. So your son, if you can recognize what he really loves about football, he can pursue those things now, and that may end up in him in being a football player. But if it doesn't, it probably will allow him to become part of communities in which he's doing things he loves, where he's lit up and people are seeing him at his best. And that's going to create relationships. It's going to create what ultimately I think brings happiness, which is these interpersonal connections, not money, not whether you make the NFL or not achievements, but who have you surrounded yourself around, or who's in your area that thinks and feels like you, and who have you connected to?
I think that's great, man. Thank you. I appreciate that from a dad to a dad. Absolutely. Now I have to ask you, as somebody who's had a path. You had your father, and you understood his path, and you've taken yours. Is there anything that you'd see differently for your children on their path?
So what I've been real thoughtful with my own children is I want them to see me engaged in my little P purpose, because basically we model for our kids the behaviors that eventually they will try on and see if they fit them. So a lot of people say, my purpose is my kids, and I'm going to spend all my time caring for my kids. I think that's wonderful, but I think you're not serving them, because then those kids are going to grow up and think that their sense of purpose has to be their kids. Well, what if they can't have kids? What if they can't find a spouse? What if by that time just people aren't having kids, or it's not reasonable, or the economics change? But instead, if you allow your kids to see you do things that light you up, that connect you to other people, that make you feel whole, they're going to do the same thing. And isn't that what we want for our kids? When they become adults, we want them to be impassioned. We want them to enter that flow state. We want them to do things that really fill them up, that connect them to other people. The best way to do that, I think, and what I've learned, is to show my kids the model of me doing the very same thing.
I think that's great. And it makes so much sense. I know a lot of people out there that we're having this conversation with are demonstrating that. And it can pay off definitely in the long run for generational wealth. And when we talk about generational wealth, as you described, it's not just money. It is connections. It is that interpersonal relationship you have with family, friends. These are all parts of generational wealth. Now, somebody's listening to this conversation around purpose. Obviously, this is a conversation to them that feels very privileged. We got two millionaires talking about finding your purpose. Is this a conversation for everybody? What would you say to the person who's saying this conversation's not for me? It's two millionaires talking about purpose. That sounds really nice.
Well, first and foremost, Harvard Adult Developmental Health Study shows that money and happiness aren't related. And I think a big key to happiness is purpose. And so there are a lot of, unwealthy, happy people out there who have a sense of purpose. So it doesn't appear so. But here's my argument. We tend to overemphasize money as a tool and de-emphasize the other tools we have available to us. So you have money, and it is a very powerful tool, and you can use money to basically free up your time to pursue purpose. So that feels privileged. But we also have all these other tools and we forget to talk about them. So we have our families, we have our passions, we have our youth, we have our energy, we have our communities, we have our skills. Those are also tools. And if you want to build a life of purpose, you can start utilizing those now. So I often talk about someone in their 20s, just gets out of college, let's say, can't get a job in what they wanted to do, goes and works at a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 6, and they're barely making enough money. They're just literally paying for food, housing, gas, water, whatever. And they look at me and they say, there's no way I could pursue my purpose. I don't have enough money. Well, at 22, you have some tools that I don't have, right? So at 22, you have more energy than I have. You have your youth. You probably don't have a mortgage. You might not be married. You might not have children yet. So even if you're working your 8 to 6 Monday through Friday, maybe you have a little extra energy to pursue something purposeful on Sunday. Let's say you spend 3 hours doing something that feels purposeful to you. Maybe even it makes a little money. So do some kind of side hustle. Try that for 6 months. If after 6 months you succeed, make a little money, maybe that'll give you a touch of margin and that 8 to 6 can become a 9 to 5, or your Monday, Friday through Friday can become a Monday through Thursday. Let's look at the other side. What if you don't make any money doing it? Well, you've added 3 hours of purposeful activity to your week every week. And that in itself is a win. And so what I tell people is we have tools and we have levers. The tools are all those things I talked about. Money is one, but your youth, your energy, your excitement, your passions, your communities, all of those things are tools, right? But then we also have levers. And there are 3 big levers I often talk about. There's the joy of addition. Add purposeful things into your life. Just as we said, even if you can't make any more money, you could maybe use some of your spare time to add in some purposeful activities. We have the art of subtraction, getting rid of things you don't like. Maybe if you do a side hustle, you can subtract some of that 9 to 5 you don't like. And then if all else fails, you substitute. You hate your job, try working for the same company, but a different boss. Try working for the same company, but try doing something different for that company. Try switching to a different company with the same skills. All these things are substitution. So using those levers and using those tools, the hope is that everyone, no matter where you fall on the privilege continuum, can start pursuing purpose now.
I love that. Yeah. And it's all about 1% improvements. These, I mean, we have these conversations. We see, I see where they are now. There's no way I can get there, but you can through small, meaningful steps over time. Now, I know you're talking about all this in your great new book, The Purpose Code. Where can people connect with you more, Jordan, and learn more about your book?
So the easiest way is to go to jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET. There you can find out how to buy both of my books, as well as there are links to all the places that I create content. The main one is the Earn and Invest podcast. That's earnandinvest.com. But I also have a Purpose Code Substack and links to my old medical blog and financial blog.
Well, Jordan, thank you so much for being here today and talking about this important topic. I look forward to sharing it with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.